everybody, Virtual Rook here, and today we're going to be working on a bow and arrow system for Godot XR. So if you've ever been interested in making a bow system so you can fire off arrows at your enemies, this is the place to watch it. So thank you so much for being here, and let's get right into the tutorial. All right, to start, I am going to assume that you've already done my XR and Godot setup tutorial that I did a while back, but just in case, I'll link it down below. The icon will look something like this. And we're basically working right off of that file, so definitely get that done first. We're also going to be working with a bow and arrow that I modeled and animated, so you'll be able to find the GLB files for that down in the description of this video. So make sure you download those as well and import them into your scene. Alrighty, let's go over to our RAS right here, and we're going to create a new folder by right-clicking and opening up this menu. And we're just going to call this one GLB because this is where we're going to be putting our GLB files. So with that selected, let's go ahead and drag and drop our arrow and our bow into that folder. Okay, and that should have pulled in all of the textures as well. It should be completely ready to go. Now we're going to go up to this plus symbol, start a new scene, and we're going to do an other node. And that node is going to be a rigid body. So hit create. All right, then just grab your arrow GLB, drag it, and attach it to that rigid body. Rename the rigid body to arrow projectile. Next up, we'll add a collision shape to this. That way it can actually hit walls. So with the arrow projectile selected, let's go ahead and add a collision shape. And then we're just gonna make this a box shape. So good to know, if you hit 1 on your numpad keyboard, you can go into the front orthographic view. And if you hit 3 on your numpad keyboard, you can go into the right orthographic. You can also, if you don't have a numpad on your keyboard, go up here and just select them on this. But it just makes it a little bit easier to line things up. So in our right side view, if we grab the red dot of our collision shape and then hold down Alt, we can actually drag both sides at the same time from the center. We'll do the same to the top. And we just want to get that as close as we can. Right there's probably good. And let's go to our side, let's go to our front. And we're already mostly there. I just want to drag this back so it's there. So you'll notice that we've actually left some space for the tip. This is just to make it so the collision doesn't happen until a little bit further in. That way it makes it look like it's really sticking into the wall, you know? Like an arrow should. Now, we're using Godot 4.3, so the physics aren't great in this version. I believe in 4.4 we're going to be using a new physics system, so this shouldn't be necessary in that version. But for now, just as a secondary way of telling if we've hit what we need to hit, let's add a raycast. All right. We're going to move the start point of the raycast to the back of the arrow. And we're going to come over here into its inspector. We're going to get rid of the 0. And instead, on the X, we're going to make it, 1's too long. Let's make it like 0.9, I think, or 0.8 maybe? Yeah, 0.8's good. And if we go up here and turn on wireframe, we can actually get a pretty good look as to where it's ending. Okay, see, that's ending too soon, or like, it's not long enough. So let's actually do 0.9. 0.9 is a little bit too far, but I think it'll be fine. This is like a backup system. Now, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and hit plus on this again, and you could do an audio stream 3D, which is right here, or audio stream player 3D. And you could add a sound effect that will play when your arrow fires. But for this tutorial, I'm not going to be setting that up. That's just if you'd like. All right, let's go ahead and hit Control S to save this. We're going to put it in the blueprints folder that we made. And arrow projectile is a great name for it, so let's just save that. We're going to select arrow, collision shape, and raycast, and we're just going to rotate these by 90 degrees. There we go. And then go to transform. And we're just going to make sure that we're zeroed out. The only one that we don't want to be zeroed out is our raycast. So that should sit right at the back where it was. And that's everything set up except for the code. So let's go ahead and click on arrow projectile and hit the plus. Now, I like to set object empty because we're going to be writing everything in, so we don't really need the extra stuff that it adds. Let's go ahead and create. So there we go, extends rigid body 3D. So first up, I'm going to just lay out all of the variables that we're going to use inside of this, and then I'll explain what each of them does. So these are the 3 that we're going to export so we can change them just to like fine tune the way that we want our arrow projectile to work. G just stands for gravity. So we're taking the vector 3 and just focusing on the vector 3 down. So the downwards force, and we're timesing that by 9.8, which is usually, I guess, just a solid place for it to fall off. And then next is the speed at which it goes through the air. We just have that set to a float 1. We can tweak it if we want to make it faster or slower in the future. All right, couple more variables. So for cast, we're actually going to get the ray cast. So we can just come over here, left click on it and drag it over to our code and drop it. And then that'll get the ray cast for us. So what we've got is just T stands for time. And we're just basically setting it to 0. It'd be set to 0 anyways. We technically don't even need this. We can just name a variable T. But I don't know. I like to have things. I already explained cast and collision. So down here is just a couple of things for the physics. We have velocity as a vector 3. We have the string force, which is something that we're going to modify as just a regular integer. And then we have init, which I think is supposed to be initial. So initial XY and initial XZ. This is to zero out our rotation whenever the projectile starts, which we're going to be getting into right now. So naturally, we want a lot of things to happen as soon as this arrow becomes active. So as soon as you fire it. So we're going to be doing a lot of things in the ready for the physics. So we'll make a func ready void. We'll then zero out the X rotation with our init XY. We'll do the same for the Y rotation. And then we will apply the force of our bow pullback to the velocity of the arrow. And that's everything for the ready function. Next up, we need a custom function for fire. And we're just going to give it the property of strength, which I believe is going to be a float. We're going to use this later to grab information from the bow whenever we start programming that. And all we need for inside of this is to tell it what force is. So force. So force is just going to times equal strength. The strength is going to be a number between 0 and 1. So we have force set up as a export variable because this determines what our maximum strength could possibly be for how far we fire the arrow. So if you're feeling that there's not enough distance on your, bow pullback and fire, then you can increase force in order to make it stronger, because we're just times equaling to strength, which again, strength is going to be a number between 0 and 1. Anyway, that does it for the function fire. So next we're going to make it so over a span of time, the arrow will just delete itself. You don't want a lot of projectiles clogging up your system that aren't going away after a certain amount of time. So we're just going to take care of that real quick. Thankfully, it has delta built into it. Delta is just a way to change the time and keep track of seconds. Okay, just a little bit of code here. So if time is greater than 10 seconds, then we queue free. Queue free just means that we delete this object, the entire object from its root node, which its root node is the arrow projectile. So perfect. T plus equals delta is just going to keep track of time. So once T equals 10, we delete the object. Pretty self-explanatory. So next up, let's take care of the physics whenever the arrow is moving through the air. So I'm going to start writing that out. So for this, we're going to use the physics process function. It should auto-complete whenever you start typing physics. Then we're going to check to make sure that the cast is not colliding. So this exclamation point means is not. And as long as we're not colliding with things, we want to make sure that the arrow is moving the way an arrow should move. So we're just going to update our velocity with a plus equals over time with the gravity and the speed. So we're just making sure that over time gravity is being added to it and speed is also being added to it. And then this code right here is making sure that the arrow has fall off. So as you know, whenever an arrow is moving through the air, it slowly starts to go down towards the ground. It should rotate accordingly. So we're just taking care of that. And then if I remember correctly, all that Move and Collide is doing is making sure that it's frame rate independent and always checking to see whether or not it's colliding. So now what if the arrow does run into something? Well, we can take care of that with an else statement. And all we're going to do for this tutorial is basically turn off the physics of the arrow. So if you have a moving object that you want the arrow to stick into, I'm not entirely sure how to do that just yet. This is just going to make it that as soon as the arrow hits something, it stops moving entirely. And we do that by disabling its collision and then freezing it. And that should do it for the code for our projectile. So go ahead and hit Control S to save it. And there you have it. Boom. Arrow projectile. Oh, also, you can switch back from wireframe by hitting display normal again. Just in case you didn't. All right. I hope you're still with me because that was the easy part. Next, we're going to set up the bow. But if you're still here, make sure that you subscribe and also like the video if you don't mind, so that way more people see it. Appreciate you. All right, so to get started, we're going to go up to Scene and New Inherited Scene. Now you're going to have to dig a little bit in your add-ons folder, which should have the Godot XR tools in it. If you followed my XR setup guide tutorial, it'll be there. And then we're just going to go into Objects and Pickupable. Now I really like to save this before I get started on actually changing stuff, because I don't want to overwrite my Pickupable object from the add-ons. So we'll just go to Pickupable Object and we're going to rename this Bow. And then we'll hit Control S and we'll make sure that we back out to our main folder. So back out to Res and then go to our blueprints instead. And it should already be called Bow. You can call it whatever you want, but we're going to leave it as Bow. So hit save. All right, we're going to drag our bow in. That looks pretty good. Then we'll go up to our collision shape because it's yelling at us that we don't have one right now. And we're just going to throw a box shape on there. We're going to hit 1 to go into the front view. Click on the top one, hold down Alt, drag it so it's pretty close to the bow. I'll do the same for the sides. It's about there. And we'll go to the side. And then we'll just dial this in. There we go. So there's like a basic collision shape just so it can rest on, a table or whatever. Oh, before I forget, we're going to double click on Bow GLB. All right, and then inside of here, we should have both of our animations, Pull Bow as well as Idle. Let's go to Pull Bow first. And we're just going to come over here to Save to File, click on Enabled, and then you're going to want to find a path within your folders that you can save it to. We didn't make a folder. I guess we could. Here, let's make an animation folder real quick. Okay. And then inside the animation folder, we just want to call this Pull Bow. Save. And then also make sure that you hit OK on Keep Custom Track. And then we'll just do the exact same thing for Idle. We'll go to Idle, Save to File, click, make sure we're in animation. And then we're just going to do Idle, Save, and then Keep Custom Track. And then we hit Re-import. All right, that's going to make it so we can add things to our animation that we're going to need later on. You'll see. All right, so next up, let's go ahead and hit Control-Shift-A while selecting the root. And we're going to look up grab. We want grab point hand left. We also want to do a Control-Shift-A, type grab again, and grab point hand right, open, okay. And we're just going to duplicate that. So now we have these two, but we also have these two, all right? So let's select the top two hands first, turn them on so we can see them. We're going to hold down Alt and rotate. Oh, sorry, we're going to hold down Control and rotate, just so it snaps. We're going to try to get this as clean as we can. So about there, I think. Oh, we might want to back them up a little. Right there. And then we'll just pull this one up a little. Yeah, right about there, I think. Okay, that looks good to me. And then with both of them selected, we're just going to come over here And we are going to change this mode to primary because we want to make it that whenever we go to grab the bow, this is the first spot that we grab. So then we can turn these off. Now we want to select our hands that or our grab points that have the 2 at the end and turn those on. And these are going to be our string pull. So we're going to just pull them back, rotate them 90 degrees. Okay. And then same thing as before, just try to get them into a pretty nice spot. That looks pretty okay to me. And then with both of them selected, we're going to make sure that mode is set to secondary. And then also very important, let's go back up to our root node, which is bow. And let's make sure that second hand grab is set to second. We don't want it to swap and we don't want it to ignore. We want it to only ever snap the secondary grab point to here. So that should fix, any potential errors. Make sure you do that. All right, and then with our grab point hand left 2 and right 2, we're going to come over here and make sure that we have position set to 0, angle set to 0, and aim set to 1. This will make it so our secondary hand can't control the position or rotation of the bow, but it can pivot around our first hand to, adjust your aim the way that a bow should work. All right. And then I just remembered we want to select our bow, right click, and make this local. So make local. That's just going to give us access to our animation tree and all that other fun stuff. Right now, the string's pulled back and we don't want that. So let's click on animation player and just make sure that we set the animation to idle. That's the one that we want. You know what? We can actually set this up now. Why not? If add track doesn't appear for you immediately, just click off of animation player and then click on it again. It should appear. All right, we also want to have a dummy arrow that only appears whenever we start to pull the string back. So we'll click on bow again. We'll come back down here and we'll grab an arrow and drop it in. And then we're just gonna rotate that. Okay, and then we're gonna move it so that way it's lined up with the string. So right there is probably good. We also wanna make sure that we have a place for our actual arrow projectile to spawn. So let's go ahead and do Control A. And then we just want a node 3D, so we'll create that. And then we'll rename this to spawn. And that we just want to move forward so that way it's in front of our bow. All right, so now we get to mess around with our animation player. So let's get started on that. So with the idle animation selected, let's go ahead and add track, 3D position track. And then we're going to select grab point hand left 2, because that's the one that's on the string. We'll hit OK. We'll do the exact same thing, but this time for hand right 2. And then one more time, we're going to do it for arrow. All right. Scroll all the way down because that's where it should be. And we should have those 3 points down here. So we're just going to right click and insert key. Now, sometimes for some reason that moves it. I genuinely don't know why, but it does. So we'll just move it back into position. And we'll go down to grab point hand right, insert key. Drag that into position. And then last but not least, for the arrow. All right, and then we're just going to click away for a second, make sure that it's lined up. See, for instance, the arrow's in the wrong spot. So let's grab our arrow, move it, and then just replace that point. So delete and there. All right, everybody seems to be in the correct spot. Now we just have to do it one more time. All of that one more time for pull bow. So now select pull bow animation and add track, 3D position. I'm just gonna go through these real quick. Okay, so now we have all of those in here. We're just gonna go down to the bottom. Well, first we're going to select all 3 of them and move them back so they're lined up with our string pulled back. So about there, looks right to me. Okay, now we're going to come down here and insert key for each. And then just make sure that you drag it so it's on the first frame. Okay, so click away, go back, perfect. Go back to idle. And as long as you're able to switch between those two and the hands and arrow stay in a logical spot, then you're good. We can now select all 3 of those in our scene and just turn them off because we don't have to see them right now. All right, so now that we have all of our animations where they roughly should be, Let's go ahead and click on our root again and hit Control A. And then let's look for an animation tree. There we go. Now over here in the tree root, we're just going to select that we would like a animation node blend space 1D. We also want to assign the animation player. So make sure you have both of those set up before you move forward. Then we can click on the animation node blend and go to animation tree. Now right now it's set to -1 to 1. We actually want this to be 0 to 1. So 0 to 1. Because we assign the animation player to this animation tree, we should be able to click on this icon right here and then click on the blend space, hit add animation, and both of our animations should show up in here. So we'll have idle at 0. Okay. And then we'll click again and do pull bow somewhere over here. And then you can just go ahead and select the mouse cursor one and just drag these into their respective spots. So now, if we click on this crosshair up at the top left, whenever we drag between them, look at that. And if we wanted to, we could also turn on like the arrow and the hands, and you could see that the arrow and the hands also now move whenever we draw back. So that's looking good. Visually pleasing. Good job. I need a shirt that says visually pleasing. Good job. We also want to make sure that we go to our bow, and under collision, we have layer 3 set, and under mask, just number 1. We also want to go to our arrow projectile and make sure just collision layer 1 is active. That should be the majority of the scene all done, which is awesome. Now we can actually focus on the coding. Let's go ahead and click our root again, Control A, and we're just going to grab a node. So just class node, nothing special. We're going to create that, and we're going to call this fire code. I'm going to make this not capitalized. Fire code. All right, with that selected, we can right click and just attach a script. It will be called fire code. That's perfect. We want object empty for template. Awesome. So extends node is phenomenal. Let me just set up a couple of variables and then I'll explain what each of them does. Okay, a couple of things. So up here, we're just making a variable named spawn. That is our spawn point from over here in our tree. Then we're going to have string pull animation. That's our animation tree right here. And then also our fake arrow, you guessed it, is that arrow that we brought in that we're animating. Now we're going to have a couple of Boolean variables down here that is grabbed, as well as both hands. You'll see why we need to check for that later on, but don't worry about it right now. All right, here we have a variable hands, which we then do square brackets in order to tell it that it needs to be an array. This is going to be where we store what hands are currently grabbing the bow, and that's going to make it so we can actually know which hand is letting go to fire the arrow. We also have distance, which is a float, which right now is 0, but we're going to adjust that again based on how far we pull back the string. If you remember correctly from the projectile, we're going to use distance in order to figure out how far the projectile should fire. And then down here is something else that might be a little bit new for some people. We have spawned arrow, but we have it set as a packed scene, and we are exporting it, which means that over here now we have spawned arrow on, like if we have our fire code selected, over here in the inspector, we'll see spawned arrow. And what we want to do is go into our blueprints and find our arrow projectile scene. So right here, we're going to grab that and drag and drop it in the empty. There we go. Make sure you hit Control S to save. We've done a lot of work. It'd be awful if you lost it now. And now we can get rolling into the code, the main code. So first we're going to do a function process. So let's get that going. Okay, so there's function process. We'll hit enter, and then I'll type out a little bit of code. So first in process, we're always checking to see if there's more than one hand grabbing. Because if there is more than one hand grabbing, that means that we make both hands equal true, because both hands are grabbing the bow. So obviously, if both hands aren't holding the bow, then both hands should be false. Pretty self-explanatory. So we'll come down a little bit further, do another if statement in process. All right, so we're going to check to see if we are grabbing the bow, if somebody is grabbing the bow, and also are both hands currently grabbing the bow. And if both of those are true, we have to start figuring out what the distance between your two hands are. So let me write that. Okay, it's a bit of a long code, but what we're doing for distance is we're making it the distance equals our hands array position 0, which is our first hand that grabbed, global transform, origin, so where it currently is, and then distance 2, and then inside of distance 2, we're finding hands array 1, so the second position, global transforms origin. So we're just looking at what the distance is between those two things. So next we're going to take our distance and we're going to use remap in order to take the starting point of our hand and the end point, like the furthest extent we can pull the string. We're going to take those 2 points. We're going to remap them to a number between 0 and 1. Because if you'll remember, in our animation blend space, we made it that 0 was the starting position and 1 was the end position. So this is just going to make it so we don't have to do other ridiculous stuff. All right, now we're going to make sure that we can never go lower than 0 and we can never go higher than 0. So we'll take distance again and do an equals clamp distance 0 to 1. So that's just going to take the value of distance and make sure it's always between 0 or 1. We also know that if is grabbed is true and both hands is also true, that we're trying to fire an arrow. So we're going to make the fake arrow visible right here. And last but not least for this section of process, we just want to make sure that the string pull animation, which as you'll remember is our animation tree, we're getting parameters blend position, so that's where the crosshair is on the blend space, and we're making that equal to our distance, which again is a value between 0 and 1, and so is our blend tree, so it'll just shift it between 0 and 1. Make sure you hit Control S to save. Always remember, save constantly. That should do it for process. Next up is going to be setting up a couple of signals. So we'll select our bow, which as you'll remember is a XR Tools pickupable object. So inside the signals, under node, we have a bunch of different signals that we can use. Let's just grab the ones we're going to be using for this tutorial, but no, signals are great. Signals are like the best. So we'll do an on bow grabbed. So double click that. There we go. And then make sure that you select your fire code. So connect, and you'll see it appear in our code. Then we would also like a released. Make sure you select fire code again. And then last but not least, we just want a on bow dropped. So right up here, we see dropped, and we'll put that on fire code. Cool. Okay, so on bow grabbed is pretty easy, so I'll write that out real quick and then explain what we're doing. Okay, so we have if not hands.hasBy. Okay, a little confusing, but what we're doing here is we have this hands array, right? It should be empty. An array can store basically anything, but in this case, we're checking to see what hand just grabbed the bow. So on bow grabbed, if the hand that we're grabbing with is not already in by, so has by, so this code right here is checking our array to see if by, which is whatever hand is grabbing currently, as long as it's not in the array, then it'll add it to the array. That's what we do down here, hands.append by. So that's just adding our hand to our hands array. Confusing, right? But it makes sense. The reason why we do this is we don't want it to add the same hand multiple times. So as long as the hand isn't already in the array, we add it to the array. We also make sure that is grabbed equals true because we picked up the bow, so it's grabbed. That's everything for the on bow grabbed. So let's go down to on bow released. This one's a little bit more intense because we're going to actually be firing the arrow with this code. And because this is going to be a little bit more intense, I'll explain in smaller chunks. So first thing we're going to do is if hands, our array, has the name of the hand that just let go of the bow, then we're going to erase the name of that hand from our array. That's all that section's doing. That's just so if we're holding the bow with one hand, then we'll say left, okay? Left hand is now in array. If we grab the string with our right hand, now left and right are both in the array. But as soon as we pull back and fire the bow, now we need to tell it that right is no longer in, but left is still in the array. So it just, that's the way computers think. So the next thing we need to do is check to see if you've actually pulled the string back or if you've just grabbed the string. We want to make sure that you pulled it back at least a little bit before we tell it to fire. Okay, so if you've pulled the distance between your hands back farther than 0.2, then we're going to make a new variable called new arrow, and we're going to tell it to take spawned arrow, which is that packed scene that we put into the code, and we're going to instantiate it, which means we're going to spawn it. So now we have to make sure that it's facing the right way and it's getting the information that we want it to get. So let's do that. So we're just going to take our new arrow and get its rotation, and then we're going to use spawn, so that node 3D that we had created earlier in our tree. We're going to use spawn to get its global rotation and apply that to our new arrow. We're going to do the same thing for the position. We're just going to grab the global position of the spawn and apply it to the new arrow. Then this code right here, add child new arrow, just adds the arrow to our scene. And then as you'll recall from our arrow projectile, we had a function called fire that required information about how much distance it should give. So we're just going to plug our distance variable into that. And again, our variable is a number between 0 and 1, and our arrow projectile is going to take that 0 and 1 and times it by our force. And then force is going to be applied whenever the arrow is spawned. And then last but not least, we want to zero out our distance, because now the hand has let go, the arrow is fired, we want it to go back to the baseline of 0. And then right below that, we just want to get our string pull animation, make sure that's set to 0, and also that our fake arrow goes back to being off. So these two lines of code should do that. And last but not least, we want to make sure that if you let go of the bow completely and no hands are touching it anymore, then we just want to is grabbed equals false. Thank you for sticking this out with me. I know that that's a lot of code. I know I've been talking a lot, but we should now be done. So hit Control S. Again, I'm always going to remind you, make sure that your animation tree is at 0. And then let's go back to our level, go to 3D view. We're just going to go ahead and find our bow TSCN file. So that's our scene. We're going to drag it and drop it onto our table, and then we should be ready to give it a test. So I'm going to put on my headset. We grab with both hands, we pull back, and we fire. And there you go. We have a working bow and arrow in Godot. It's a little bit difficult, but it's very satisfying once you get it to work. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this one. I know this was a very, very difficult project, and I hope you're able to stick it out with me and get it done. If you have any questions at all, leave a comment, or you can even join my Discord, which is down in the description, and you can ask me there. I'm always happy to help as best I can. But thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye for now. Thank you so much to my coffee supporters, Ethereal Vega, Starry-Eyed Prince, and Stillery. Your support really means the world to me. And if you would also like to support me, please consider joining my coffee, link down below. Also, special thank you to Kochacek for making the music for this video. I really appreciate it.